Welcome, everybody. This show is The Liberal Arts Will Save the World, and our task here is to talk with faculty and staff from PLU about the things they're passionate about and how the things they're passionate about matter. My name is Kevin O'Brien. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Dean of Humanities, and today I'm joined by a co-host, Jen Rude, who is the awesome university pastor at PLU. And Jen, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself with a liberal artsy question because you are the proud graduate of a liberal arts Lutheran university.
I am, yes.
So what's something you learned in college that was not your major that you find yourself frequently using in work or life or anything?
Yeah, I actually loved that in college, that as part of like general education, I took classes outside of my major and minor because they're not things that I would have necessarily chosen. But one of them that I was thinking about was I took a class in literary journalism, like creative nonfiction, because my advisor recommended it. And she said, like, I love this professor. I think you'll enjoy it. And that's really a class about like how to tell a good story. We read a lot of good stories. So they're true stories, but they read like novels. And so I think that really helped me, like, as a pastor, as a preacher, think about storytelling, like how to be a good storyteller. And then another class I took was gender studies. And I think for me, that was a really good introduction to privilege and oppression and kind of the complexity of my own identity as a white, queer, cis, Christian woman. And that class really like laid a foundation, I think, for some of the activism work I've been a part of, both in and outside the church. So that was a good class. And then my third one is going to relate to our guest here today, which was biology. I was, not necessarily like a super sciencey person, but, you need to take a science class, which is good. So I took a biology class, and my professor, we were talking about evolution. And he talked about how he was a person of faith, a Christian, and how for him, science and faith went together. And so it was this beautiful, like, he's a scientist and he was a deep person of faith. And for me, that helped me see that, like, I don't need to turn off my brain when I am in a faith context. And then I don't need to, like, turn off my faith when I'm in a learning or an academic context. And so those are three that I find that, I continue to, like, think about and have definitely impacted the kind of pastor I am.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was a religion major, just like Jen, just like you, and I had to take a physics class just to graduate my senior year, and it was like the best class I took. And it was the same, like the professor really wanted to talk theology, but then also like wanted me to understand gravity, and it still blows my mind every once in a while I think about it. Yeah, so that's awesome. Thank you, Jen.
Physics, that I didn't go for that. Good job.
Well, and I wish I knew more biology these days, so I'm here to learn today. And Jen and I get to talk today. Our faculty expert is Dr. Shannon Seidel, and Shannon is assistant professor of biology. Shannon teaches courses in microbiology, in virology, and Shannon's an expert in science education. And my challenge for you, Shannon, is in like one breath's worth of words, can you define for us what it means to be an expert in science education?
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. It's so fun to get to chat with both of you. So to be an expert in science education is to study how people teach and learn science and how we can be the most effective science educators, the most inclusive science educators, and make sure that everyone in our classroom is learning science and capable of succeeding in science and seeing themselves as a science person. So it sounds like you both had some really positive experiences with that in your own education, and I'm happy to hear it because you had awesome science educators. So those are people we could look at and learn from.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to connect you to Professor Riley, who taught me physics, if ever you want to. So the purpose of this show is to get to know our faculty and staff, but also to connect to current events, to connect to things that are going on. And it seemed like the obvious thing to talk about with an expert in science education was coronavirus and the way sort of
explain it to us.
Explain everything and what should I do and fix it for me.
Yeah.
But even more than that, like how the culture has responded or failed to respond or thought about like the information that comes out and how maybe we could make better sense of it. So I guess my first question is like, what's it been like for you the last 4 months to think about science education while there's been this attempt at really rapid education of the public about this disease?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And actually, everything you've said about the liberal arts so far and your own experiences in them really play into this as well. So so my training in science education was actually at the postdoc level. So I actually studied that after I went to graduate school. And in graduate school, I studied viruses. I studied HIV and how it gets into cells, how it infects cells. So virology and science education are really my areas of study. So it has been a really interesting 4 months on both of those fronts, as you mentioned. So, I mean, the virus itself, right, it's novel as a coronavirus, but there are lots of other coronaviruses. So we can learn from family members of this virus to better understand how it might act in the world and how we might try and fight it, how we might, boost the immune response to it via vaccines and things like that. But as you're saying, it's also incredibly important to educate the public about what's happening, to make sure that people have good sources of information about, and we've seen good and bad in that from across our country and around the world, right? But really some powerful science education is happening in the general public. So I was teaching virology this spring. So starting in February, I had a whole new group of virologists working with me in the classroom, and we actually got to follow the pandemic throughout the semester, first together in the classroom, then as we moved online. And try and I don't even know where I'm going with this, but there's just so much. It's just been a wild time, right?
Sure. I bet you didn't have any students in your class that said, this doesn't apply to real life at all.
Yeah, right. Totally. Why do I need to learn this? Yeah.
Well, I think the funny thing has been that, usually the things that I'm teaching students about virology, they haven't heard, daily in the news, but I kind of feel like everyone in the world got a virology education this spring, right? So some of the stuff that I talk about, like I usually define terms like epidemic versus pandemic, for instance, and everybody knows what a pandemic is because we're living through one, right?
Yeah.
So there's just so much virology education happening generally that it was really interesting to think about how I could help my students talk to their family and friends and, communicate science more effectively. So we got to do that all spring.
Yeah. What kinds of things did the students really want help communicating? What were they trying to talk to people about?
Well, one of the cool things we did was, as a lab activity, was they brought in questions from their family and friends. And some of them were myth-busting type questions. Some of them were sort of the basic biology of the virus questions. But they each brought one that was important to them and somebody in their community. And so that was really cool because they brought in these questions and then they wrote an answer to the question. And then we collaboratively edited those answers to try and improve them, to add evidence. And it was really cool because this is once we were already online at this point, right? And so we didn't get to be collaborative in the classroom, but just via Google Docs, we were able to help each other out. And so we were on a Zoom call and we were, talking about, hey, can somebody read over this answer? Does this make sense? How, is this going to make sense a month from now? Are we going to need new information? Right. So it was really, really this collaborative effort to answer these questions that their family and friends had. And then they all agreed to have their names on it and to have it shared publicly. And so it was really neat because it got shared around at PLU and people shared it on their Facebook pages. So they were really excited to be able to share answers to questions about virology, with their family and friends.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really, it was obviously an assignment I'd never done before, but, we needed to try new things in the classroom. And so that was, it was a really great way to engage what's actually happening, and for students to be able to bring their whole selves to the work and to, think about what's happening in their community. It was a lot of fun.
And what's it like I'm curious how different it is when you read the news than when I read the news. Are you going to really technical sources of information about the virus, or are you reading, the newspaper and filtering the data through what you know? How do you read science?
I will say Shannon is my phone a friend. Shannon is my phone a friend.
You're also doing that assignment where you
Yeah, totally.
send her a Google Doc with a question?
Yeah. Actually, I did have some faculty email me questions, like, and everything from like, if I put my ice cream in the freezer and somebody had sneezed on it at the store, will the virus still, be gone in 3 days? This is
That is a very specific question,
very
though.
specific,
That was an
but
experience
really,
somebody had of ice cream.
Yeah, exactly. But you're asking about, where I get my sources of information. So some of both, right? Some of it does just come from the newspaper. I mean, the Seattle Times has a lot of information that's really helpful about local, what's happening with coronavirus. So that's one of my sources. But also primary literature. So in science, we tend to publish in journals. So a lot of things like the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet and Science and Nature and journals like that have a lot of, fast breaking publications right now about coronavirus. That was another thing we did in our class, because the virology class is a 400 level class. So it's sort of an upper division class that students tend to take after they've taken a bunch of other introductory classes. And so another activity we did was students went out and found a paper, a primary literature paper, and then brought that in and did like a 5-minute presentation on that paper. So we got to look at, 15 different papers across what was happening in real time. All of them had been published in the last month or two, because this is all so new. So I actually got a lot of information from my students this spring, right? Because they went and found those papers and they summarized them, and I read along as well. So so I get information from the news, from primary literature, from my students, from colleagues, so all that. And I imagine, there's so much that is coming out that relates to your disciplines as well, and to everybody across PLU. This is affecting all of us.
Yeah, I guess that was another thing I was wondering, is like, because you're a scientist at a liberal arts university, like because you sort of are invited to see all these things as connected, like what other parts of your mind or curiosity have you felt like the virus has really stimulated? Like, are you thinking a lot about social structures or faith or truth or anthropology, or like what else has it spurred for you beyond your scientific expertise?
Oh man, everything. I mean, there's not a discipline at PLU that I can think of that it doesn't relate to, right? Because I mean, there's so much happening in terms of faith communities and how they're dealing with this, or the psychology, the human behavior aspects of because the virus spreads differently depending on human behavior, right? And so studying and understanding human behavior and how we can modify and change human behavior is huge in this. Society, social structures, right? And how this virus is spreading differently in different cities across America or countries around the world. So global, politics, local politics. I mean, there's just, business, the impacts on the economy. There's just nothing that this doesn't relate to. Which it's really cool. I'm really excited. I hear that there's going to be a class in the fall about the virus and from different disciplinary perspectives. And that's so cool. I love that. I really love that.
Yeah, PLU students watching, it's going to be a 1-credit class. You should enroll. It's going to be the coolest thing. And I think there'll also be a way for like alums and folks to sign up and take it. So everybody sign up.
I want to sit in on the whole semester.
Yeah, totally. Sign me up.
I think we all do.
Help me make sense of all this. Yeah.
I've got one more question about the virus, which is just, Shannon, when you is there a question of the science of it that you think is like the most interesting, exciting, or important? Is there like, I'm really waiting to find out X, Y, or Z? Like, what's the thing that you're on the edge of your seat, like eating popcorn, waiting for the study to come out?
I do love popcorn. So as I sit on the edge of my seat and eat popcorn, think about the virus. I mean, I think that there are endless directions to go, and there are lots of things to study, and there are many, many important things. The one that I think I'm most interested in right now is if we can, if a vaccine can produce a long-lasting immune response. I think that's the thing that's most interesting right now. There's some evidence that's come out about the immune response to the virus. It's all very preliminary, so I don't want to overstate any results, but It looks like, at least in some cases, the immunity isn't that long lasting. But there's some promising evidence about some of these new vaccines that are being tested, and hopefully we can get a longer lasting immune response, right? Get lots of B cells and T cells involved and antibodies and all of that to fight off the virus for a long time. So my fingers are crossed for that, and I'm really excited to see what happens. It's also just unbelievable to me that we already have several vaccines in human trials. I mean, we have never worked as quickly as we're working right now as a scientific community to try and solve this. So I think some people outside of the scientific community think, man, this is going slow, right? That we don't have a treatment and that we don't have a vaccine. But usually this takes 5 to 10 years, if sometimes more. So the fact that even within 6 months we have vaccines being tested is really, really cool.
Can I ask a question about science education?
Yeah.
That has to do with the coronavirus. So because of the coronavirus, that we moved to remote learning, online learning for the spring. And I'm curious, like you as an educator, like you had to kind of pivot your methodologies. And because you study how people teach and learn science, I'm wondering, like, is there anything you learned about teaching virtually that actually like enhanced learning or helped you, just like connect with students differently or?
I think, I talked about the shared Google Doc and kind of collaboratively editing with students. I've never done something like that before. It's always been something like they've turned in work and I've given feedback, and maybe I had them do peer review as well. But to actually do that in real time as a group was something I've never tried in my teaching before, and actually I think worked really well, and it's something I would try even when we're back on campus. But yeah, there are lots of other little things that are like structures of activities that I've kind of learned how to use online. And mostly it's because I have awesome colleagues who've given me great ideas, right? So nothing I do is like completely created by me. I just like take all the good ideas that people share. And there's awesome communities happening right now at PLU among faculty sharing ideas like that, so we can help each other out with blended learning. So we get to do a workshop tomorrow where I get to learn ideas from other people and share some ideas as well. So
sparking some creativity, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's an interesting thing, right? Like we could talk to people more in the art fields about like how constraints kind of produce creativity, right? That when you have limited access to the classroom and being in person, you do things differently and great things happen. So I've had a few of those experiences. I'm not saying I want to teach online forever, but I certainly have found some things that I want to take with me from this experience and move forward with.
Yeah, no, it's really, I think that and your answer on the vaccine both really helped me to see, the coronavirus, it's terrible and it's tragic, and the social implications and the injustice of it are really hard. But then you're also noting there's all these ways that people are stepping up and doing brand new things, like the scientific community is coming together and working on vaccines in a whole new way, and educational communities are coming together. And I hope we get past the pandemic and can work through the tragedy of it and keep the creative energy and the ways we came together. And it's cool to hear how you see that from your scientific perspective. That's so cool.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm gonna pivot us because the theme of the YouTube channel this week is rest, and it might be that not all of our viewers find it restful to talk about teaching in the fall and the coronavirus. So I want to leave a little room for let's talk about rest. And so Shannon, you as a human being, in addition to an educator and a virologist, what do you do to rest? What do you do to restore yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that's changed, right? With what we are constrained by in these times. I might have at another point in life said that because I love to travel, but obviously I'm not doing much travel right now, where I'm going away. But so the thing that I like to do the most, even before the pandemic, is rock climb. And that might not sound like the most restful thing, but it's very relaxing.
Hanging on a rock by your fingertips.
Terrifying, on the edge of a cliff. But Yeah,
Especially when you have to
rock
wipe
climbing.
down the rock from the person who went before you, right? Yeah.
Well, early in the pandemic, this is kind of hilarious that rock climbers put chalk on their hands
Yeah.
and things like that, and people were trying to look at this is scientists and rock climbers combined. We're trying to argue that the pH of the chalk makes it that the virus couldn't live in that environment. In fact, it's very safe to go rock climbing. I don't know that the community really bought that, but
Safe to go rock climbing. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're still climbing up a rock though, right?
Yeah, and holding on by your fingers.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So is that like, do you think it's is it like the act of rock climbing itself like is relaxing to you, or once you've finished and you're exhausted from it, like that's like where does it feel restful to climb a rock as someone who's never done
good
it?
question. Well, for me it's this perfect combination of it's a little bit social because you need a partner and you need somebody else to be there with you, but when you get up on the rock you're kind of by yourself, and so it's a little bit sort of meditation in motion where you have to focus on what you're doing, right? You can't be thinking about the emails that you need to send and the class you need to prep and the grading you have to do. You have to be like, move left hand up. Like you're just really focused, you're really present in the moment. And that's for me what rest really is this being really present where you're at and just thinking about like, what do I need right now? And when you're rock climbing, you can't think about much else than where am I going to move now? How am I going to maintain my energy and just and keep my mental my emotions in check so that I don't kind of freak out in this moment, right?
No, that's really good. Just that it's about presence, which hopefully anything we're doing for rest, whether we're as brave as you or not, is about being fully present in ourselves and wherever.
Exactly. Like even getting lost in a book, it's the same thing, right? Like you get to be really present and you can't be thinking about anything else but what you're reading, right?
That's so cool. Well, just to bring us to a close, I'm gonna ask Jen if we're convinced. The title that was given to this show is "The Liberal Arts Will Save the World."
Yes.
What do you think? Virology, science education, playing a role in making the world a better place?
I think so. It's about community. It's about like using critical thinking and sources. Yeah,
I think. Of course, absolutely, I agree, and I think one thing that you said, Shannon, you passed. But one thing you said that I found so helpful was, I think even though I had this great experience of taking physics in college and seeing all these connections, like I still tend to think of science as living in a little box, separate from other parts of the world. And what you were talking about is, the virus is about the virus, but also about human behavior, and we have to sort of think from all sides and that the study for the vaccine is not just asking what's the virus going to do, but also what's going to do in the human body, and then what's the human body going to go out and interact with. And that all those things are coming together is exciting and inspiring about what you do and what you teach. So that's awesome.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I love being in a place like PLU where I get to think about things like virology from lots of different perspectives, because we're a small enough school that we get to bump into each other and have conversations across disciplines all the time. And that's the best. And our students bring that too, because they're in a bunch of different classes. So yeah, we get to do a lot of really interdisciplinary things, and that's awesome. But thanks. I'm so happy that
Thanks for joining this conversation. Thanks for kicking off this show. Thank you, Jen, for being with us.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks to Kenzie, our producer. Thanks to Lace, the mastermind of the PLU YouTube channel. And thanks everybody who's watching. And everybody stay safe when in the lab, when climbing rocks, and when doing everything else.
Wash your hands.
Yes, wash your hands. Thanks, everybody.